Good morning, friends. Welcome to the GRE GMAT Titans YouTube channel. My name is Hitanshu Munjal and I'll be your trainer for the coming lectures. Uh, those who have already appeared for the GRE GMAT Titan exams must be familiar with the critical reasoning questions, and those who are new might or might not be familiar with the critical reasoning portion of the exams. Uh, you must be those who have already appeared for the GRE GMAT test uh, must have found critical reasoning questions pretty much frustrating to answer. So today in this lecture I'll be covering some of the critical reasoning basics. So let's begin with the introduction for what is critical reasoning basically. So critical reasoning questions are introduced in the exam or made the part of the GRE GMAT exam to test your logical thinking skills. They basically want to test you that how you can understand complex ideas and how you can break down arguments and how you can find the appropriate solution to the answers. So what's critical reasoning? Critical reasoning is one of the most vital skills tested in exams like the GRE, GMAT, SAT, and CLAT, as it measures your ability to analyze, evaluate, and construct logical arguments. It goes beyond memorizing facts. It tests how well you can think through complex ideas, identify assumptions, detect flaws in reasoning, and draw valid conclusions from given information. Whether you are interpreting a lawyer's argument in CLAT, assessing a business decision in GMAT, or evaluating evidence in GRE or SAT passages, critical reasoning helps you sharpen your analytical thinking. Mastering it not only boosts your test scores but also enhances your ability to reason clearly and make sound judgments in real life decision making. Skills tested by CR questions, critical reasoning questions. Identifying assumptions, recognizing unstated ideas that support an argument. So what are assumptions? We will cover in detail in the later lectures. Evaluating arguments, judging the strength or weakness of reasoning presented, drawing conclusion, inferring what logically follows from given evidence, detect logical flaws, spotting errors or inconsistencies in reasoning, strengthening or weakening arguments, understanding how new information impacts the validity of an argument. So let's have a look at a sample argument. It says for more than 50 years, many evolutionary biologists posited that early fish such as Eusthenopetron developed limbs as a result of the need to drag themselves across short distances when their watery habitats dried up during periods of drought. However, new fossil evidence suggests that this hypothesis is incorrect. Fossilized remains of Acanthostega, a primitive fish, reveal that even though the animal had rudimentary limbs, it could not walk on land. Acanthostega lacked ankles, which means that its limbs couldn't support its weight. Furthermore, its limbs were too short to prevent the organism's chest cavity from collapsing once the animal left water. So this is the stimulus part of the critical reasoning question, and now we have the question stem, which says which of the following would most strengthen the author's argument, and now we have 5 options. So the first important step in solving these kind of questions is that we should be able to deconstruct the argument into its basic building blocks. So what are the basic building blocks of an argument? Premise, conclusion, and assumption. So first, let's have a look at these components in detail. Anatomy of an argument, understanding its building blocks. Every argument is like a structure. It stands firm only when its foundation is strong. In critical reasoning, the anatomy of an argument refers to understanding the key components that make up any argument: the conclusion, the premises or evidence that support it, and the assumptions that connect the two. By identifying these elements, you can clearly see how and why an argument works or fails. Mastering the anatomy of an argument is the first step towards analyzing, evaluating, and constructing logical reasoning effectively in exams like the GRE, GMAT, SAT, and CLAT. So let me tell you about these components in brief. So conclusion is the author's opinion or the author's main point or the claim that the author is making. Premise is the evidence or data or the information on the basis of which the author makes a claim. So the conclusion is always based on some kind of a premise or evidence that supports it. So let's look further at the conclusion and premise. So the conclusion is the core claim of an argument. A conclusion is the main point or claim that the author wants you to accept as true. It is the final idea that the entire argument is trying to prove or persuade you to believe. In critical reasoning, your task is to identify this central statement, the therefore of the argument, because understanding the conclusion helps you evaluate whether the reasoning and evidence truly support it. So the first step is you identify the conclusion. Then when you have identified the conclusion, you try to figure out the premise and later on the assumptions. So conclusion is, as you have seen, it is the author's claim, author's main point, author's opinion. And once you have figured out what the author is trying to make you believe, that means you have identified the conclusion. So how to identify the conclusion? To find the conclusion, look for the main point the author wants you to believe or agree with. Ask yourself questions like, what is the author's opinion? What is the author's main point? What is the author trying to prove? The conclusion is the destination of the argument, the statement the author wants you to accept after considering all the evidence or reasoning presented. It often expresses a judgment, recommendation, or prediction. So the conclusion, one thing is that it is the author's opinion. So the author's opinion can be in the form of a judgment regarding quality or merit, or the author may make a recommendation that this and this thing should be done or whatever, and it can also be in the form of a prediction. So it often expresses a judgment, recommendation, or prediction, and it is a claim that everything else in the passage is designed to support. Once you identify the conclusion, you can better understand the structure of the argument and evaluate whether the reasoning behind it is strong or flawed. Now let's identify the conclusion in the sample argument given above. So what do you think is the author's main point here? So when we deconstruct this argument, we see that in the first part of an argument, the author has stated an old theory. The old theory states that the fish like eusthenopetron develop limbs as a result of the need to drag themselves across short distances. This is the old theory the author gives. This is the theory which many evolutionary biologists have believed in since the last 50 years. But in the next sentence, it says, however, new fossil evidence suggests that this hypothesis is incorrect. So now here, obviously, when we see the word incorrect, we automatically know that here the author is giving his opinion. So the opinion here, so basically this is what the author is claiming, that the above hypothesis is incorrect. So this is the claim of the author, and hence this is the conclusion. And when we read further, it says, fossilized remains of Acanthostega, a primitive fish, reveal that even though the animal had rudimentary limbs, it could not walk on land. Acanthostega lacked ankles, which means that its limbs couldn't support its weight. Furthermore, its ribs were too short to prevent the organism's chest cavity from collapsing once the animal left water. So again, when we analyze this portion of the argument, we see that it is the evidence or the information on the basis of which, by analyzing this information, the author reaches the conclusion that the above hypothesis or the old theory that has been given is incorrect. So this part is the evidence and or the premise of the argument. Here is how we identify the author's main point. To identify the author's main point in this argument, start by asking what is the author trying to prove or persuade me to believe. Here is how to reason through it. The first sentence presents an old theory that early fish developed limbs to move across land during droughts. In next sentence, the author says that this hypothesis is incorrect. Incorrect is the opinion word here. In order to substantiate that the old theory is incorrect, the author introduces new fossil evidence and details showing that the above theory doesn't hold true. Therefore, the author is trying to make us believe that the above theory is incorrect. Hence, the main claim of the author is that the long-held hypothesis that early fish developed limbs for walking on land is incorrect, as shown by the fossil evidence of Acanthostega. In short, in the above sample argument, the conclusion is represented by the words, however, this hypothesis is incorrect. So, let us see it in the form of a real situation. That this particular person who formulated this argument is an evolutionary biologist himself, and he is trying to understand the reason that why the fish developed limbs, because it is the old theory. It has been theorized that the life originated in the oceans, and first single cell life forms developed in the ocean, and these then multiplied into complex life forms like fish, etc., and other sort of marine animals. So one day at random, what happened is some fish were swept on the beach along with the wave, and they got trapped into small ponds, and these ponds started drying up during periods of drought, and the fish needed to look for other watery habitats. So what they did is that they jumped out of the water and started dragging themselves across the land and to another watery habitat, or maybe even back into the sea. So this process happened for thousands and lakhs of years, and eventually the fish developed limbs. This is the old theory. Now he wants to scrutinize this theory, whether this theory is correct or not. So he digs further, he investigates further, and he comes across the evidence in the last part. So when he sees that, when he analyzes the fossilized remains of Acanthostega, he sees that even though the animal had rudimentary limbs, it could not walk on land. So therefore, it made it implausible that the above theory is correct. So now when he has to present his theory to the evolutionary biologist to prove that they were wrong, obviously the other evolutionary biologist will ask him that on what basis do you claim that our theory is incorrect. So he has to present this evidence that is mentioned in the last part of the argument here. So इसको हम सरल भाषा में अगर समझें तो जो कंक्लूजन होता है उसको हम निष्कर्ष बोल देते हैं, ठीक है। प्रिमाइस होता है आधार। तो बेसिकली इससे क्या पूछा होगा कि आप किस आधार पे कह रहे हैं कि हम गलत हैं, ठीक है। तो मेरा वो बोलेगा मेरा आधार ये है कि ये जो आ, नीचे एविडेंस दे रखा है, दिस एविडेंस विच हैज बीन गिवन हेयर ऑन द बेसिस, ये मेरा आधार है ये कहने का कि आपकी जो थ्योरी है वो इनकरेक्ट है। चलिए अब हमने समझ लिया कि मेन पॉइंट, एक तरीका तो ये है कि हम ऑथर का क्लेम या ओपिनियन समझ लें तो हमें कंक्लूजन हम आइडेंटिफाई कर सकते हैं। बट व्हाट आर द अदर वेज ऑफ आइडेंटिफाइंग कंक्लूजन? So we look for conclusion indicator words like therefore, thus, hence, so, consequently, it follows that, or this shows that, often introduce the conclusion. You should also look for any words that indicate an opinion, such as the following: suggest, believe, hope, indicate, argue, follow, or correct, incorrect, as we saw in the sample argument. In addition, a conclusion is often a belief about what should or might happen. Look for the following: should, would, must, will. So here it says that, this is an indication that the conclusion can also be in the form of a prediction. Remember, the conclusion is often the author's opinion about what might happen. Check for contrast words. Phrases like however, but, yet, on the other hand may signal a shift from background information to the author's real point, as we saw in the sample argument. Distinguish between fact and opinion. Conclusions usually express the author's opinion or judgment, not just a factual statement. So when we are trying to understand the conclusion, we should try to understand whether this is merely a factual statement or it is the author's opinion or judgment. Ask what the evidence supports. Identify which statement the other sentences are trying to prove or justify. That's your conclusion. Test by paraphrasing. Try saying the author believes that before each sentence. The one that fits naturally is likely the conclusion. Some additional conclusion indicator words are thus, therefore, hence, consequently, as a result, so, accordingly, clearly, must be that, shows that, conclude that, follows that, for this reason. So here we have seen that the contrast word however, here is the background information, and this contrast word, there's however, there's a contrast word however, and following this contrast word is the author's opinion. And I already told you that the word incorrect in this incorrect indicates, and this is an opinion word, so it indicates the author's conclusion and opinion, and also if you want to paraphrase it, so the author, if we paraphrase it like this, the author believes that the above hypothesis is incorrect. That way also, this is the conclusion. Okay, so now what we have understood, now that we have understood what conclusion is, let's move on to the premise. Premise definition. Premise is the supporting evidence of an argument. A premise is a statement or piece of evidence that supports the conclusion of an argument. It provides the reasons or facts the author uses to persuade you that the conclusion is true. In simple terms, premises are the foundation on which the argument stands. They explain why the author believes the conclusion is valid. So in simple words, the premise is the reason for the conclusion or the why of the conclusion. So once we have understood the conclusion, we have to ask ourselves why the author believes like this, why the author is making such a claim, why the author has such an opinion. The answer to the why will be the premise. So different forms of premises are factual premises, statements based on data, statistics, polls, reports, or verifiable facts. Example, the company's profits increased by 20% last year. uh, any kind of data, whether it is in the form of statistics, polls, reports, or surveys, uh, can be a premise, because the purpose of collecting data is to understand the data, analyze the data and reach a conclusion. उसमें से कुछ, हर एक डेटा का एक पर्पस होता है कि उसमें से हम कुछ निष्कर्ष निकाल सकें. Then there are causal premises. These explain the cause and effect relationship. Example, because the temperature dropped, water in the pipes froze. Analogical premises are which compare two things and show similarity. So draw analogical premises, draw comparison to support a point. Example, just as plants need sunlight to grow, students need motivation to succeed. Testimonial premises are cite opinions or findings of experts or authorities. According to recent medical research, regular exercises reduces stress. Hypothetical premises present if and then conditions to build reasoning. If demand increases, prices are likely to rise. Each type helps strengthen the argument by offering different kinds of logical support for the conclusion. How to identify a premise in an argument? Simply put, a premise is the logical reason for the argument, the statement that gives support or evidence for the author's conclusion. To identify a premise, look for the why, as I've already stated, behind the author's main point. Ask yourself, what reason is the author giving to prove his claim? Premises often contain statistics, surveys, polls, or reports, and all of these things are premises. In fact, these are the most common types of premises. In short, the premise answers the question, why should I believe the conclusion, and provides the foundation on which the entire argument is built. So as already stated, data in any form, in the form of statistics, surveys, polls, or reports is a premise, because our purpose of collecting data is to understand it, analyze it, scrutinize it deeply, and reach some kind of a conclusion. And the other way, of course, is to understand the why of the argument, why of the conclusion, why the author is having such a conclusion. When we understand the why, we find the premise, we figure out the premise. Like conclusions, premises also have certain indicator words that signal when the author is presenting supporting evidence or reasoning rather than the main point. These words help you recognize the statements that build the foundation of the argument. Common premise indicators include because, since, for example, for the reason that, in that, given that, as indicated by, due to, owing to, this can be seen from, we know this by. So now we have some practice questions here, premise and conclusion recognition practice. So first sentence says, given that the price of steel is rising, we will no longer be able to offer discounts on our car parts. So clearly here, which part is the opinion of the author? The opinion or the claim is that we will no longer be able to offer discounts on our car parts. So this is the conclusion, and the basis on which and the information on the basis of which the author makes this claim is that the price of steel is rising. So that part is the premise. Second line states the political situation in Somalia is unstable owing to the ability of individual warlords to maintain powerful armed forces. So again, the author's claim here is that the political situation in Somalia is unstable, and the basis on which he makes the claim is that the individual warlords have the ability to have powerful armed forces. So the second part is the premise, the first is the conclusion. Third is, since we need to have many different interests to sustain us, the scientist's belief must be incorrect. So again, the author makes the claim that the scientist's belief must be incorrect. So this part is the conclusion. And since word is the indicator for the premise, so the first part is the premise. We need to have many different interests to sustain us. This is the premise. Fourth, so as indicated by the newly released data, we should push forward with our efforts to recolonize the forest with snowy tree crickets. So we have already read that conclusion is also in the form of recommendation. So the author is here making a recommendation here that we should push forward with our efforts to recognize the forest with snowy tree crickets. So this is the conclusion here. And the, as already discussed, any form of data is a premise. So here the premise is as indicated by the newly released data. Despite the support of the president, it is unlikely that the new defense will pass. A bipartisan group of 15 senators announced that it does not support the legislation. So here the author's opinion or the claim is that it is unlikely that the new defense bill will pass. And on what basis he is making the claim? The claim, the information on the basis of which he makes the claim is that he has heard a bipartisan group of 15 senators make announcement that it does not support the legislation. Okay, he has heard the news that a bipartisan group of 15 senators has announced that it does not support the legislation. So on the basis of this news, he comes to the conclusion that it is unlikely that the new defense bill will pass. So obviously the last part is the premise, last sentence is the premise, and the statement that it is unlikely that the new defense bill will pass is the conclusion. Question 6. The earliest known grass fossils date from approximately 55 million years ago. Dinosaurs most likely disappeared from the earth around 60 million years ago. Based on this evidence, as well as fossilized remains of dinosaur teeth that indicate the creatures were more suited to eating ferns and palms, scientists have concluded that grass was not a significant part of the dinosaur diet. So here it is quite easy to identify the conclusion by the indicator word is concluded. So this part is the conclusion. Grass was not a significant part of dinosaur diet, and this information, the indicator word here is evidence, obviously. So again here it is easy to identify the premise. So a premise is the evidence for the conclusion. So therefore this evidence as well as this evidence, this whole part is the premise of this argument. 7th says automaker X has lost over $2 billion this year due to rising costs, declining automobile sales, and new governmental regulations. Because of the company's poor financial situation, it has asked its employees to pay more for healthcare and to accept a pay cut. However, the workers at Automaker X are threatening to go on strike. If that happens, Automaker X will have no choice but to file for bankruptcy. So we have already understood that a conclusion can also be in the form of a prediction. So here the author makes the prediction that Automaker X will have no choice but to file for bankruptcy. So again, this is a conclusion. And the above information is the basis on which he says he makes this prediction. So this is the premise. 8th, the rise of obesity among citizens of country Y has been linked to a variety of health problems. In response to this situation, the country's largest health organization has called for food manufacturers to help combat the problem. Since the leading members of the nation's food industry have agreed to provide healthier alternatives, reduce sugar and fat content, and reduce advertisements for unhealthy foods, it is likely that country Y will experience a decrease in obesity-related health problems. So here again, the author is making a prediction in the last statement. It is indicated by this future tense here, will experience, right? So this is the conclusion, and the indicator word for the premise is since. It is introducing the reason for this conclusion. So this part is the premise. This whole statement, since the leading members of nation's food industry have agreed to provide healthier alternatives due to sugar and fat content and reduce advertisement for unhealthy food, is the premise. Next statement is television has a harmful effect on society. So this is the author's opinion. This is the author's claim. So this is the conclusion. This can be seen from the poor school performance of children who watch significant amount of television, and from the fact that children who watch more than 6 hours of television a day tend to read less than non-television watching children. So by observing the school performance of children who watch quite a lot of TV and the children who do not watch that much TV, he has come to the conclusion that television has harmful effects on the society. So therefore the latter part of the argument is the premise. So 10th says the rapid diminishment of the ecosystem of the Amazon threatens the entire planet. Consequently, we must take immediate steps to convince the Brazilian government that planned development projects need to be curtailed for the simple reason that these development projects will greatly accelerate the loss of currently protected land. So consequently is one indicator word for the conclusion. And also when we read this sentence, we find that the author is, when we read the sentence after the word consequently, we find that the author is making a recommendation. So we have already understood that conclusion can also be in the form of the recommendation. So therefore the conclusion is that we must take immediate steps to convince the Brazilian government that planned development projects need to be curtailed for simple reason that these development projects will greatly accelerate the loss of currently protected land. This part is the conclusion, and the above part is the premise. 11th, recent advances in technology have led to a new wave of smart appliances, including refrigerators that note when food supplies are low and place an order at the grocery store, washing machines that automatically adjust the wash cycle and temperature based upon the clothes in the machine, and doorknobs that can identify the house owner and automatically open the door. A technology expert predicts that due to these innovations, machines will soon outnumber humans as the #1 users of the internet. So again, in this question, the author is making a prediction in the last line. Therefore, this is the conclusion, and the information on the basis of which he makes such a prediction is the premise. So the first part of the argument is the premise. The part of the argument from recent advances in technology to automatically open the door is the premise, and the latter part of the argument, technology expert predicts that due to these innovations, machines will soon outnumber humans as the #1 users of the internet, is the conclusion. So students, this is the end of the lecture. Hope this concept of premise and conclusion is clear to you. If you have any doubts, you can post in the comments section, and in the next lecture we'll understand another important component of the argument, that is called the assumption. Thank you so much for your time, and all the best.